She spilled the wine on purpose. Not clumsiness, not an accident. Felicia Adeyemi had been carrying trays and heels for 6 years across 3 cities and 2 continents, and she had never once dropped so much as a bread roll by mistake. What she did that evening was a choice. A split-second, white-hot, completely rational choice. And the moment the deep red Bordeaux hit the sleeve of the man's $5,000 jacket, she felt 2 things at exactly the same time. The first was the specific, clean satisfaction of a person who has finally stopped swallowing something that should have been said. The second was the very clear understanding that she had just ended her career. The restaurant was called 71. It sat on the 43rd floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago, and it was the kind of place that did not list prices on the menu because the kind of people who ate there did not need to ask. Felicia had worked there for 14 months. It was the best-paying job she had ever had, and she had been, until approximately 40 seconds ago, the best server on the floor. Thomas, the floor manager, used to say that Felicia could read a table from across the room before she had taken a single step toward it. That she knew what people needed before they did. That she had a gift. Thomas was currently watching her from across the dining room with the expression of a man whose gift had just ruined his evening. The man at table 6 did not move. He sat with the stillness of someone who has never in his adult life had to react to anything quickly because the world has always been arranged to give him time. He looked at his sleeve. He looked at the wine spreading across the white tablecloth. Then he looked up at Felicia. His name was Andre Morrow. He was 41 years old. He was French Ivorian, born in Abidjan, raised between Paris and New York, currently the founder and majority shareholder of a tech and infrastructure holding company with operations in 11 countries, and a valuation that financial journalists like to argue about in the range of $9 to $12 billion. He had arrived at 71 that evening for a private dinner with 2 investors from Dubai, and he had spent the previous 20 minutes speaking to both of them with the total, uninterrupted confidence of a man who had never once wondered whether the people around him were genuinely interested or just well paid to appear that way. And then, mid-sentence, he had snapped his fingers at the waitress who was passing behind him, not to call her, to move her, like she was a piece of furniture that had been placed incorrectly in his peripheral vision. Felicia had stopped walking, had looked at the hand, had looked at the man, had looked at the hand again. And then she had reached across the table to refill the investor's glass, and her elbow had found the open bottle, and physics had done the rest. Deliberately, completely, without a single tremor of regret. Andre Morrow looked at her across the ruined tablecloth and said nothing. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform outrage for the benefit of his guests. He simply looked at her, the way you look at something unexpected that has arrived in a place you thought you understood, and his expression was not anger. It was curiosity. Felicia set the bottle down, straightened up, and said in a perfectly composed voice, "I'll get you a cloth." She walked to the service station, picked up a fresh linen, walked back, and placed it beside his arm on the table without touching him or looking at either of the 2 investors who were staring at her like she had lost her mind. Then she said, "Can I get you anything else?" Andre Morrow looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "Yes, your name." She told him. She did not know why. She walked away before she could think too hard about it. Behind her, Thomas was already moving toward the table with his whole body aimed at damage control. Behind her, Andre Morrow was still watching the direction she had gone. "Stay with me, because I know what you think this story is, and it isn't that. This is not a story about a billionaire who sweeps a waitress off her feet. This is a story about a woman who has been underestimated every single day of her working life, and one night decided she was done performing smallness for people who mistook her patience for limitation. Everything that happens after the wine, all of it flows from that one moment of refusal. Hold on to that." Felicia Adeyemi was 31 years old, and she had been working since she was 15. She had grown up in Ibadan, Nigeria, the eldest of 3 children, the daughter of a secondary school principal and a seamstress who between them had built a life that was stable and full of love, and completely without financial cushion. When her father died suddenly, a stroke, A Tuesday morning, no warning, Felicia was 22 and had been in the middle of her final year of a business administration degree. She finished the degree. She also started sending money home before the ink was dry on her certificate. She came to the United States at 24 on a work visa through a hotel group that had a Chicago property. She stayed after the visa period ended through paperwork that cost her 2 years of savings and a lawyer who charged too much and delivered exactly what he promised, which was permanent residence and nothing extra. She had worked her way from hotel housekeeping to room service to restaurant service to 71. Each step planned, each step executed, each step a specific calculated move toward the thing she was actually building toward. Felicia was going to own a restaurant, not manage one, not consult for one, own one. She had a business plan in a folder on her laptop that she updated monthly. She had a savings account that she added to every pay period without exception. She had a mentor, a woman named Adana who ran 2 restaurants in Houston and had agreed to advise her after Felicia sent her a cold email that Adana later described as the most organized thing she had ever received from a stranger. She had a timeline. She was 3 years out. Everything was moving exactly as planned. What she did not have, and had not allowed herself to want for a very long time, was anything that could not be put into a spreadsheet. That was not loneliness. That was strategy. The distinction mattered to her. She was still telling herself that at midnight, sitting in the 71 changing room after Thomas had let her go with a professionalism that she had respected even as it was destroying her evening, when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It said, "I'd like to offer you a conversation. If you're interested, I'll be at the Langham Bar at 9 tomorrow morning. It's not a job offer, it's just a conversation. A Morrow." She stared at the message for a long time. Then she called her best friend Zara, who answered on the second ring despite the hour because Zara always answered, and told her everything. Zara said, "Felicia, you spilled wine on a billionaire and he wants to have coffee with you." Felicia said, "I know." Zara said, "And you're thinking about not going." Felicia said, "I didn't say that." Zara said, "You didn't have to. You're using your thinking voice, the one that sounds like you're reading terms and conditions. Felicia, go. What is the worst that could happen?" Felicia said, "I'm already unemployed. I suppose the worst has happened." Zara said, "Exactly. Go to the coffee. Worst case, he's terrible and you leave. Best case," she paused. "Best case is something you cannot put in a spreadsheet, and that's the part that's scaring you." Felicia said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I'll go. Here is what you need to understand about Andre Morrow before we go any further. He had not sent that message because he was charmed. He was not the kind of man who charmed easily or was charmed easily. He had sent it because in 15 years of building a global company and sitting in rooms with some of the most powerful people on Earth, not one of them had ever, under any circumstances, made him feel that his behavior required a response. And something about that, the fact that a waitress had simply decided that the normal rules did not apply to how she should be treated, had lodged itself in his mind the way a real thing does, like a splinter, like something that needs attending to. The Langham Bar was quiet at 9 in the morning, almost empty. Andre was already there when she arrived, which she noted, punctuality in powerful people was either a performance or a genuine value, and the distinction was usually visible within the first 5 minutes. He stood when he saw her. She noted that too. She sat down across from him. She did not apologize for the wine. He did not mention it. They ordered coffee, and for a moment neither of them said anything, which was more comfortable than it should have been between 2 people who had met under the circumstances they had. Then he said, "Tell me something. When you made that choice last night, and it was a choice, I could see it. What were you thinking in that exact second?" She said, "I was thinking that I had been a version of invisible for long enough, and that one moment of being seen was worth whatever it cost." He was quiet. Then he said, "Even if it cost you the job." She said, "It already cost me the job. I made the decision after the cost, not before." He said, "That's not how most people operate." She said, "Most people are trying to preserve something. I've already built the next thing. The job was the current chapter, not the whole book. He looked at her, said, "What's the next chapter?" She told him the restaurant plan, the timeline, the savings, Adana, the folder on her laptop. She did not oversell it or undersell it. She gave him the facts the way she would give a table their order, clearly, completely, without performance. When she finished, he said, "You're 3 years out." She said, 2 years and 8 months as of this week. He said, "What's the funding gap?" She said, "I'm not looking for funding." He said, "I didn't ask if you were looking. I asked what the gap is." She looked at him evenly. She said, "The gap is none of your business yet." He smiled, not the polished smile of someone performing warmth, something smaller and realer than that. He said, "Yet." She said, "Yet." Then she said, "Now tell me something. Why did you snap your fingers at me? Not the reflexive answer, the real one." He was still for a moment. She could see him deciding whether to give her the easy version or the true one. He gave her the true one. He said, "Because I have been in rooms where everyone moves around me for so long that I stopped noticing people weren't choosing to. I stopped seeing the difference between someone who respects you and someone who is afraid of you. I snapped my fingers because in my world, things move when I need them to, and I stopped asking myself whether that was okay a long time ago." She said, "That's a very honest answer." He said, "You asked an honest question." She said, "Do you think you would have noticed it at all if I hadn't done what I did?" He looked at his coffee, long pause. Then he said, "No, probably not." She said, "That's the problem with the kind of power you have. It removes all the feedback. You can't improve at anything because everyone around you has decided that their job is to protect you from the information that would allow it." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. He said, "You've thought about this before." She said, "I've served people like you for 6 years. I think about it every shift." He said, "What conclusions have you come to?" She said that power corrupts slowly. Not dramatically, the way people imagine. It just removes friction, one small piece at a time, until you are moving through life without resistance, and you have mistaken the absence of resistance for being right. He did not speak for a long moment. Then he said, "I'd like to see you again." She said, "That was not what I expected you to say next." He said, "What did you expect?" She said, a counterargument, a defense, something. He said, "I don't have one. You're right. And I haven't been told I'm right about something that mattered in a very long time." He looked at her directly. "I want more of that. Dinner. This Friday." Felicia looked at him. She was doing the thing she always did, reading the table, assessing what was real and what was positioned. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Friday, but I pick the restaurant." He said, "You just lost your job at a restaurant." She said, "Which means I know exactly what a good one looks like. Friday, 7 o'clock, I'll send you the address." If Felicia is already your kind of person, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment below. Tell me, was the wine spill the best decision she ever made? I want to know what you think. Now stay because this story is just getting started, and the next part is where everything gets complicated. She sent him the address of a Nigerian restaurant in Bronzeville called Iya's. It had 16 seats, no reservations, cash only, and food that made people close their eyes involuntarily on the first bite. The owner was a woman in her 60s named Mama Comfort, who had been running the place for 22 years and still came in every morning to make the pepper soup herself. Felicia had been eating there since her 2nd month in Chicago. It was the place that made the city feel like somewhere she could stay. She arrived first, sat at the table in the corner, the one with the view of the whole room, the one she always chose because old habits from 6 years on restaurant floors do not die easily. When Andre walked in alone, no assistant, no security visible, just him in dark jeans and a jacket that was expensive but quiet about it, every head in the small room turned. Not because anyone recognized him. Because he had the particular quality of someone who has moved through spaces of power for so long that the body itself carries it, and people feel it before they understand it. He sat down, looked around, said, "This is not what I expected." She said, "What did you expect?" He said, "Somewhere you were trying to impress me with the choice." She said, "I'm not trying to impress you. I'm taking you somewhere real. There's a difference." He picked up the menu, a single laminated card, both sides. He said, "What do I order?" She said, "Put the menu down. I'll order for you." He put the menu down. She ordered for both of them. Mama Comfort appeared from the back, saw Felicia, hugged her with the ease of long familiarity, looked at Andre with a frank curiosity that made no concession to his implied status, and said to Felicia in Yoruba, "This one has a serious face." Felicia said, "In Yoruba, he is learning." Mama Comfort laughed and went back to her kitchen. Andre said, "What did she say?" Felicia said, "She said you look like you've forgotten how to enjoy a meal, and you should let it teach you." He looked at her. She looked back, entirely composed. He said, "That's not exactly what she said, is it?" She said, "Close enough." The food arrived. Egusi soup, pounded yam, fried plantain, goat stew. Andre looked at it for a moment. She said, "Eat it the way it's meant to be eaten. Hands, not the fork." He said, "I haven't eaten with my hands since I was a child in Abidjan." She said, "Then it's been too long." Something shifted in his face at the mention of Abidjan. Not pain exactly. The particular expression of someone who has traveled very far from something and occasionally forgets they left. He ate with his hands. He did not do it perfectly. He did not try to. And somewhere in the middle of the meal, the performance of himself that he had been carrying into every room for 15 years set itself down on the table next to the plantain. And he was just a man eating food that reminded him of something true, in a 16-seat restaurant in Bronzeville, across from a woman who had decided weeks ago that she was not going to be impressed by anything except the real version of a person. He said, "Why did you bring me here?" She said, "Because I wanted to see if you could be somewhere without trying to own it." He said, "And?" She said, "Jury's still out, but you put the fork down, that's a start." He said, "Can I ask you something that might be too personal?" She said, "You can ask. I'll decide if it's too personal after I hear it." He said, "What happened to make you this way? This certain, this unwilling to be moved by things that move most people?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "My father died when I was 22. Suddenly, no warning. And the thing about sudden loss is it doesn't give you time to perform grief. You just are it, completely. And when I came back up from that, something had changed. I had stopped being willing to spend energy on things that were not true, on performing being smaller than I am so that other people feel larger, on waiting for permission. I just stopped. And I've been building from that ever since." He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "My mother is the only person who has ever spoken to me like you do." She said, "Like what?" He said, "Like my money is entirely beside the point." She said, "Your money is entirely beside the point. It's a fact about you, not a verdict on you. I don't evaluate people by facts. I evaluate them by what they do with what they have." He said, "And what have I done with what I have?" She said, "Built something impressive and gotten lonely inside it." She paused, "But you showed up alone tonight. You put the fork down. You're still here. So I think you know there's more to build. You just haven't been around anyone who made you want to start." He was completely still for a moment. Then he said quietly, "You are the most unexpectedly precise person I have ever met." She said, "I've been described worse." They stayed until Mama Comfort gently informed them she needed her table back for the next seating, which she delivered with the warmth and finality of a woman who does not modify her schedule for anyone, and Felicia loved her for it. They saw each other 5 more times in the following 3 weeks. Not dates, exactly, neither of them used that word. Walks. Coffee. One afternoon at the Art Institute where they argued in front of a Basquiat for 40 minutes about whether the painting was about anger or grief, and discovered they were both right and wrong in equal measure. One evening where he had a work dinner, he could not avoid, and she went along and sat beside him, and twice said the thing to his colleagues that he had been thinking, but had been too polished to say. And both times the table had gone still and Andre had looked at his plate to hide the fact that he was trying not to smile. She started a new job, not in a restaurant this time. Adana had connected her with a food business incubator in the West Loop that needed someone who understood operations from the floor up. And Felicia had walked into the interview and walked out 40 minutes later with a job and a schedule that, for the first time in 6 years, had actual daylight hours in it. She was building. She was always building. And Andre was watching her build with the expression of a man who has been in the presence of momentum before, had generated it himself, had recognized it in other businesses, in other people, but had never seen it in someone who was doing it entirely for themselves, with no interest in whether he was impressed. He was impressed, that was the thing. He was genuinely, unexpectedly, completely impressed, and the feeling was strange to him because it was not connected to any transaction. She was not asking him for anything. She was not performing for him. She was just going, full speed, straight ahead, and she let him walk alongside it, but she never once adjusted the pace for him. He told her this one afternoon over coffee. He said, "Do you know how rare it is to be around someone who doesn't need anything from you?" She said, "You mean someone who doesn't need anything from your money?" He said, "I mean someone who doesn't need me to be any particular version of myself in order for them to feel okay." She said, "That's not rare. That's just what it looks like when someone has their own life." He said, "I don't think I've been around that before. Not like this." She said, "Andre, how many of the people close to you would still be in your life if the money went away tomorrow?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said 2, maybe 3. She said, "That's the loneliest answer I've ever heard from someone surrounded by people." He said, "I know." She said, "You built something extraordinary, but you built it in a way that made the life around it hollow. That's not a money problem. That's a values problem. You optimized for the wrong variable." He said, "What's the right variable?" She said, "People who would tell you the truth even when it costs them." She paused. And then she said, quietly, almost to herself, "I might be one of those people." He looked at her. She was looking at the table. And for a moment she was not the composed, certain woman who had spilled wine on him and negotiated coffee from a position of zero leverage. She was just a person saying something true and vulnerable in the particular unguarded way that only happens when you have stopped rehearsing. He said, "I think you might be the only one." If this story is doing something to you right now, good. Hit the like button and subscribe. I need you to be here for what comes next because what's coming will test everything both of them have built. Stay with me. The complication arrived on a Wednesday in the form of a woman named Isabel. Felicia saw it first in a photograph. She was not looking for it. She was scrolling through news the way you do absent-mindedly while the coffee brews, and a gossip column loaded with a photograph from a charity gala the previous weekend. Andre in a tuxedo, and next to him, close in the way of people who have a shared history, a woman who was beautiful in the specific polished way of someone who has always been in these rooms and knows exactly how to occupy them. The caption said, "Andre Morrow and Isabel Fontaine, longtime companions, at the Meridian Foundation Gala." Longtime companions. Felicia put the phone down, picked it back up, read the caption again, put it down, poured her coffee, stood in her kitchen for a while looking at nothing. Then she sent Andre a message. It said, "I saw the photo from the gala. I think we should talk." He called her in 4 minutes. She picked up on the first ring. He said, "The caption is misleading." She said, "I'm listening." He said, "Isabel and I have known each other for 9 years. We dated briefly 4 years ago. It ended. We have remained in the same social circles because that world is smaller than it looks. When she was at the gala, we spoke. The photographer is someone who used to cover us when we were together. He knows the clique he can sell." She said, "Is there anything current between you and her?" He said no. She said, "Andre, I need you to understand something. I am not asking because I am insecure. I am asking because I have a policy about the truth and I apply it to everyone, including myself. I will not build something on a foundation I am not sure about, so I am going to ask you directly. Is there anything I should know before we go any further?" There was a pause. She waited it out. He said, "Isabel has been pushing to reconcile for 8 months. I have not responded to it. I have not encouraged it. But I have also not said clearly to her that it is not possible. I have been," he paused, cowardly about it, "because she is in my circles and confrontation in those circles has consequences I have been choosing to avoid." Felicia said, "That's honest." He said, "You asked for honest." She said, "I did, and here is honest from my side. I cannot be a question mark in someone's life. I will not arrange myself around someone else's unfinished business. I have too much of my own to build to spend energy on ambiguity." He said, "I know." She said, "So what are you going to do about it?" He said, "I'm going to call her today. Clearly, I should have done it months ago." She said, "You don't have to do it for me." He said, "I know. I'm doing it for myself. Because you have been holding a mirror up to my life for 4 weeks, and I do not like everything I see in it. And I would rather build something true than preserve something comfortable." Felicia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's the right answer." He said, "I have a good teacher." She said, "Don't push it." He laughed. She held the phone and listened to it and felt something she had not planned for, which was the specific warm terror of a person who is falling and has noticed it and cannot entirely bring herself to stop. The thing about the Isabel situation was that it did not end cleanly. Andre called her. He was clear. Isabel received it the way people receive clarity they have been successfully avoiding for a long time, badly, and with consequences. Within a week, there was a whisper campaign in Andre's social circles, careful and elegant and devastating the way only wealthy people with time and connections can manage. Nothing said directly, just enough implication to shift rooms. A mention of the waitress, said in a specific tone. A question about whether he had lost his perspective. An old friend who called to check in and spent 30 minutes being concerned in a way that left a mark. Felicia found out about it from Zara, who had a friend who moved in adjacent circles and had heard the whispers. She sat with the information for a day. She thought about her plan. She thought about the restaurant, the savings, the timeline, the folder on her laptop. She thought about how many years she had spent building something immune to exactly this kind of disruption, and whether what was happening right now was a signal to protect the plan or evidence that the plan had always been a way of protecting herself from wanting something she could not control. She called Andre the next morning. She said, "I know about the whispers." He said, "I know you know. I was going to call you today. I'm sorry. This is my world behaving badly and it has nothing to do with you." She said, "It has something to do with me. My name is in it." He said, "I know, and I can make it stop. I have that power. I just want to know how you are before I do anything." She said, "I'm fine." He said, "Felicia." She said, "I'm bothered," which is different from broken. "I have been dismissed and minimized and whispered about since I was a foreign worker cleaning hotel rooms in a city where I barely spoke the language. I survived all of that. I will survive women at galas who are upset because a man they wanted chose differently." He was quiet. Then he said, "I want you to hear something. I am going to say it once, and I am not going to dress it up because you have never once appreciated dressing things up." She said, "Say it." He said, "I have built everything I have by being honest with myself about what matters and moving toward it without hesitation. And I have been dishonest with myself for a long time about what was missing. Not the company, not the growth, something smaller and more important. Someone who doesn't need me to be Andre Moro the brand. Someone who looks at me and sees a person with work to do and thinks that's interesting enough to stay for. I haven't had that, and now I do. And I am not going to let social consequences that I created by being a coward 4 years ago take it from me." Felicia was silent for a long time. He said, "Are you still there?" She said, "I'm here." He said, "Say something." She said, "You have a remarkable ability to say exactly the right thing and make it sound like you arrived at it yourself." He said, "I did arrive at it myself." She said, "I know. That's what makes it remarkable." He said, "Is that a yes?" She said, "It's not a no." He said, "I can work with that." She said, "I know you can. That's another thing I've noticed about you." Here is the thing about Felicia Adeyemi that this story requires you to hold all the way to the end. She never once asked him for anything. Not money, not connections, not a shortcut on the timeline. She was still going to open her restaurant. She was still going to hit the milestone. She was still 3 years out, 2 years and 3 months now, and she was still updating the folder every month without exception. What changed was not the plan. What changed was that she stopped treating the plan as a wall she was building around herself and started treating it as a foundation she was building toward something. Those are different things, and the difference between them is everything. Andre met Adana. Felicia had not planned this. It happened because Adana came to Chicago for a food conference, and Felicia had dinner with her, and Andre had asked if he could join, and Felicia had said yes because she had run out of reasons to keep the parts of her life separate, and was beginning to suspect that keeping them separate had always been more about self-protection than practicality. Adana looked at Andre the way she looked at everything, which was directly and without ceremony. She asked him 3 questions in the first 10 minutes: what he had built, what it had cost him personally, and what he would build differently if he had to start over. He answered all 3 honestly. Felicia watched Adana's face as he did. Afterward, when Andre stepped away from the table, Adana looked at Felicia and said, "He's real." Felicia said, "I know." Adana said, "You weren't sure before." Felicia said, "I'm still running the evaluation." Adana said, "That's a defense mechanism dressed up as due diligence." Felicia said, "I know that too." Adana said, "Felicia, you have been building toward this restaurant for 7 years. You have been precise and disciplined and completely correct in every move you made. And I am telling you, as the person who has watched you do all of it, that you do not have to be precise about this. Some things don't require a plan. They require a decision." Felicia said, "What if I get it wrong?" Adana said, "Then you will handle it, the same way you have handled everything else. But you will not get this wrong, because you have been wrong before and I have never once seen you not see it coming. And you are not seeing this coming. It's already here." The night it became real was an ordinary Wednesday. They had no plans. Felicia had worked late at the incubator, presenting a proposal that had gone well, and she was on the train home with her shoes off in her bag and her feet grateful for the flat sandals she had changed into, reading something on her phone, when he sent a message that said, "I'm outside Iya's. Mama Comfort is threatening to close the kitchen. Get here." She laughed at her phone on a train like someone with no self-consciousness left and got off at the next stop. When she arrived, he was at their corner table. Mama Comfort had already brought the food without being asked, because Mama Comfort had decided 3 visits ago what they ate and saw no reason to revisit the decision. There was a small bottle of palm wine and 2 glasses, and the kind of quiet that a restaurant has at the end of a night when the rush is over and only the people who belong are still there. She sat down. He looked at her. She said, "You called me away from my commute for palm wine." He said, "I called you because I had a good day, and you were the first person I wanted to tell." She stopped. She said, "What happened?" He told her. A deal that had taken 11 months had closed that afternoon, and it was the kind of deal that should have made him want to call his board, his lawyers, his investors. And the first number he had reached for in his phone was hers. She said, "That's the most unguarded thing you've said to me." He said, "I know." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because I stopped performing about 20 minutes ago, and I cannot find the motivation to start again." She poured 2 glasses of palm wine, said, "Tell me about the deal." He told her, not the version he would tell investors, the version with all the numbers and the strategic positioning and the narrative arc. The real version. The part where he had been afraid it was going to fall through. The moment 3 weeks ago when the lead negotiator had walked out and he had sat in a conference room in Dubai for 45 minutes alone before deciding to make one more call. What the call had cost him in terms of what he had conceded, and why he had decided the concession was worth it. She listened the way she always listened, which was completely. When he finished, she said, "You made the right call." He said, "How do you know? You don't know the numbers." She said, "I don't need the numbers. I know the decision. You gave something up to save something bigger. That's not weakness. That's the difference between someone who wins and someone who builds." He looked at her. He said, "Do you know what you are?" She said, "I'm your dinner company." He said, "You are the clearest person I have ever met." She said, "I've been described worse." He said, "I'm serious." She said, "I know you are." He said, "I don't want to just have dinner with you." She looked at her glass, set it down, said, "I know." He said, "I want all of it. I want the hard conversations and the ordinary Wednesdays and the planning spreadsheets I know you're never going to stop making, and the moments when you tell me I'm wrong and you are correct, and the restaurant when it opens in 2 years and 10 months and the version of you that gets there. I want to watch you build it. I want to be there when it opens. He stopped. He said, "I want something real, with you specifically." The restaurant was quiet. Mama Comfort had disappeared into the back. The city hummed outside. Felicia said, "I have conditions." His mouth pulled at the corner. He said, "I know, tell me." She said, "I don't want your money in my restaurant. Not a cent. I build it my way, on my timeline, with my funding. My name on the door means my hands only." He said, "Understood." She said, "If you snap your fingers at anyone in front of me again, I will not spill wine on you. I will simply leave." He said, "Fair." She said, "And if you ever stop being honest with me, not carefully honest, not diplomatically honest, but actually honest, we are done. I have no patience for managed truth." He said, "I know. Those are the same terms I have for you." She said, "Good. Then we have an understanding." He said, "Is that a yes?" She said, "It's a yes." He picked up his glass. She picked up hers. Mama Comfort appeared from the back with a piece of chin-chin on a plate and set it between them without a word and went back to her kitchen. And Felicia thought that was the most perfect thing that had ever happened in her adult life, that the most important yes she had ever said had been witnessed by the woman who made the best pepper soup in Chicago and had the dignity to celebrate it with fried dough and say nothing at all. What happened after was not a transformation. Neither of them was the transformation type. What happened was that two people with very different lives found a way to let those lives run alongside each other without either of them having to shrink. It was not always easy. Felicia's world moved fast and precise, and on a schedule that did not negotiate. Andre's world moved in different time zones and unexpected directions, and occasionally required things at 11 at night with no warning. They argued about time, about availability, about the specific language of one conversation in February that both of them would reference for years as the worst and most useful fight they had ever had. They worked through it the way you work through things when both people have decided the thing is worth the work, which is to say imperfectly and honestly, and with the grace of people who know how to stay in a room even when leaving would be easier. Felicia opened her restaurant 26 months after that Wednesday at Ia's. It was in the South Loop, 40 seats, West African menu with a modern kitchen, her name on the door Adeyemi's in simple letters that said exactly what it was. The funding was her own, every cent of it. The business plan was the one she had been updating monthly for 3 years. The mentor was Adana, who flew in from Houston for the soft opening and sat at the bar for 4 hours and cried twice, which she denied to everyone except Felicia. Andre came to the soft opening as a guest. He sat at a table in the middle of the room. He did not bring investors or journalists or anyone who could amplify anything. He brought himself, and he ordered everything on the menu, which Felicia noticed from across the room with the specific pride of someone watching their work be taken seriously by someone who knows what seriously means. Mama Comfort came. She sat with Andre for 2 hours. Felicia, passing the table, heard them arguing about the correct ratio of ground crayfish in a soup, and she had never in her life felt so completely at home. Her mother flew in from Ibadan 3 weeks after the opening. She walked into the restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon before the lunch rush, looked at every detail. The kitchen Felicia had designed herself, the menu she had written herself, the staff she had trained herself, the name above the door, and she sat down at a table and put her hands flat on it and breathed in slowly. Felicia came out of the kitchen and sat across from her. They looked at each other. Her mother said, "Your father would have walked in here and said nothing for 10 minutes. And then he would have said, 'This is exactly what I hoped for.'" Felicia's eyes filled. She did not cry. She said, "I know." Her mother said, "You built this." She said, "I built this." Her mother looked toward the front of the restaurant. Through the window, Andre was visible on the sidewalk, on a phone call, walking the short, concentrated paces of a man in the middle of something. He looked up through the glass, saw Felicia's mother, raised one hand briefly. Her mother looked at the gesture and then looked back at her daughter. She said, "He is proud of you too." Felicia said, "I know." Her mother said, "Good. That is the correct kind of man. The kind who is proud of what you build, not threatened by it. They are rarer than they should be. Keep him." Felicia said, "I intend to." This story does not have a villain. It has a woman who decided that being overlooked was a condition and not a destiny. It has a man who had everything and was hollow inside it until someone refused to fill the hollow with performance. It has a restaurant in the South Loop with 40 seats and the best egusi soup in Chicago. And it has a spilled glass of wine on a $5,000 jacket on a night that looked like a disaster from every angle except the one that mattered. When people asked Felicia later how she met Andre, she always told the true version. The fingers snapping, the wine, the fired job and the midnight message and the coffee at the Langham and Iya's and all of it, every unpolished, embarrassing, beautiful piece of it. And people would ask, "Weren't you afraid? That night when you spilled the wine, weren't you terrified?" And she would say, "I was terrified every day for 3 years before that night. I was terrified every time I sent money home and didn't know if there would be enough left for rent. I was terrified every time I was the only person in the room who looked like me. I was terrified every time I updated that business plan and wondered if it was ever going to be more than a folder on a laptop." She would pause, and then she would say, "That night I was done being afraid of the wrong things. I spilled the wine because I decided that the thing that should terrify me was not a man with power and an expensive jacket. The thing that should terrify me was getting to the end of my life and finding out I had been careful in all the places I should have been brave." The restaurant is called Adeyemi's. It has a 3-month wait list. The pepper soup is made from Mama Comfort's recipe, adapted with permission, and Mama Comfort comes in on the first Sunday of every month to taste it and deliver her verdict, which is usually mixed and always useful. The corner table is reserved on Thursday nights. No reservations taken. The sign on it says simply, "Occupied." The staff know not to seat anyone there. Felicia and Andre sit there every Thursday at 8 o'clock and eat the food and talk about whatever the week has been and occasionally argue about things that are not worth arguing about and mostly do not need to say anything because the table says it for them. It is not a perfect life. It is a real one. And that, Felicia would tell you without hesitation, is so much better than perfect that there is no comparison. It started with a glass of water, or a glass of wine, depending on how you tell it. It started with a woman who decided, in one split second, that being seen was worth whatever it cost. She was right. She is almost always right. And the man who snapped his fingers at her that evening in a restaurant he owned is, to this day, very careful about what he does with his hands. If you made it to this line, you are exactly the kind of person I make these stories for. Subscribe right now if you haven't already. Hit the bell so you never miss a new story. Drop a like if Felicia is the most unforgettable woman you've met in a story this week. And in the comments, I want to know, what was your moment? The wine, the conditions she gave him, the restaurant opening, the Thursday table. Tell me exactly where this story got you. I read every single comment, and I will see you next week with something just as real and just as good. Don't miss it.